Welcome to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by MomsRising. We have a really important show for you today. We start out talking about the definition of fascism, the written definition of fascism, and how that's tragically relating right now to what's happening in our schools, our communities, and our politics. After that, we take a look at the big bad budget betrayal bill and the voucher proposal that's embedded in it. And we look at what that means at the national level and at the state level. Then we close the show celebrating Pride Month, what you can do to increase fair treatment of all people in every community. We're going to jump right in with our first guest. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by MomsRising. We have a nation-lifting, power-building, spectacular guest with us right now, Beatriz Beckford of MomsRising. Woo! Welcome, Beatriz.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to join the show and to be with you and your members.
We have a critical moment happening right now where there is rampant, unfair treatment of immigrant families. Listeners, 1 in 4 children in America live in an immigrant family right now. So when we're talking about the unfair treatment of immigrant families, we're talking about essentially 25% of families in America being treated unfairly. And that is not okay. One of the things that Beatriz, you've been working on for so long is the fair treatment of all people. And can you talk a little bit about this moment and where the cruelty toward immigrant families is playing into what's happening in our schools?
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is that each and every day we're seeing deeply harmful, deeply toxic attacks on immigrant families. Immigrants are such a critical part of our communities. They make major contributions and have been since the onset of this country. And still, each and every day, at the highest levels of power, and by highest levels of power, I mean this current administration attacks and criminalizes immigrant families. And the reality is that same culture that we see, the same rhetoric and narratives that are being pushed out there that against immigrant communities are also playing out in the school space and are deeply harming immigrant students and subsequently their families. So the reality is that we have a climate that renders students and families unsafe. It makes them feel unwanted. It marginalizes them. It discriminates against them. And this is not the type of climate that we need in our schools. It is definitely not the type of climate that we need in our communities.
And this is impacting immigrants of all documentation statuses. I mean, it's just really rampant unfairness happening. And I want to pull us up to 30,000 feet and talk about where did this playbook come from? This is not happening out of the blue. We've seen time after time in Russia and fascist and authoritarian countries that one of the first things that happens is immigrant communities are attacked by those fascist leaders in a way to push forward this weird and toxic type of nationalism. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the root cause, because sometimes once people realize that there's a root cause, and the root cause is actually not about immigration, but about consolidating power in an authoritarian government. And that is exactly what's happened around the world. And if you were going to write a playbook, that's what's happening or starting to happen here. What are your thoughts on that, Beatriz?
Yeah, absolutely, Kristen. I mean, I could not have said it better myself. What we're really talking about is a fascist playbook. And the cornerstone of a fascist playbook is othering. It is depriving people of a sense of belonging. It is creating an us versus them dynamic, a dichotomy that deeply harms all of us. Even if you don't see yourself as part of the group being othered, it has far-reaching impacts on all of us. And we really do have to hold that movement philosophy that says if one of us is harmed, all of us is harmed, because that is how you defeat a fascist agenda. That's how you defeat this consolidation of power amongst those elites and the obscenely wealthy that seek to consolidate that very power that you're talking about. The fascist playbook, the cornerstone of it, is othering. And what we're seeing play out time and time again, and no different now, is the othering of immigrant communities or anybody deemed other by the administration. And that's what we need to be working to address.
Completely. And I've had a couple of people recently say, Kristen, what is fascism? I'm seeing it written on t-shirts. I'm seeing it written on signs. I've seen it written like around my community, but I have no idea what it means. I have to tell you, I had to look it up too because I was like,
Everybody should look it
have
up.
a refresher.
Everybody
What
should look it up.
exactly is it? And so I'm going to just read, Beatriz, just for our listeners, what it is, because when you look up what it is alarming. As if any of us needed to be even more alarmed, it is alarming. So fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, and ultra-nationalist. Remember, people, we were just talking about that? Political ideology and movement. It is characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism. We just had that weirdly weird military parade, and forcible suppression of opposition. Side note, we are seeing members of Congress being actually, forced to the ground and handcuffed
That's right.
for doing their job, by the way. The job is oversight of the executive branch. Subordination of individual interests for the perceived interests of the nation, and a strong regimentation of society and the economy. I bring this up because also when we're looking at this economic perspective, we have this big, bad, horrible betrayal budget that's going through the US Senate right now that is actually that weird regimentation of our economy, because that bill, studies and research shows that budget bill actually doesn't help the people of America. It helps people who are billionaires, which is part of fascism. So it's alarming when you read this. I know I made some comments throughout about, where we're seeing this in our country. But when you just read through the definition
Yeah.
of fascism, y'all look it up on Wikipedia, look it up in your dictionary, read it through, and then think about the headlines from the last week and know that this absolute attack, unfair attack on immigrant families from Donald Trump and from those Republican leaders in Congress is part of this greater fascist playbook. So, Beatriz, given that this is incredibly alarming, what is your advice? I say
Yeah,
it laughing because you
I
can
think
laugh or cry. I'm like,
I
whoa, this
know
is
it is a
really
laugh or cry
alarming.
situation, but whether you laugh about it or you cry about it, however you cope with it, it is a situation that we have to reconcile with. One of the things I think is really important to name is all the things that we're sort of seeing, the chaos that gets manifested in this type of a fascist climate are the things that we're also seeing play out in immigrant communities. It's the same things that we're seeing play out with families who are worried about, how the dismantling of the Department of Education is going to impact their students who are living with disabilities or their students who are living in rural communities. One of the most beautiful things about this country is our education system. Everybody, no matter what your status is, has a right to a public education in this country. And we have people that come to this country and do incredible things and make incredible contributions to our education system and to our communities. But when we see a fascist playbook being enacted, we see certain things across the board. We see bullying, harassment, and discrimination. We see fear mongering, right? And in the case of immigrant students and families, it's fear of immigration enforcement, right? Fear of being detained or being perceived as a criminal as an immigrant, even if you are somebody who has a legal status. We see a denial of supportive services. We see bias. In schools, we see low expectations set for immigrant students. And in the larger narrative and rhetoric, we see a bias and low expectations across the board for people that are deemed other. We see deeply harmful exclusionary discipline practices. We see criminalizing students. We see criminalizing broadly, right? And that sort of gets pounded every day in the media, misinformation that criminalizes people who would not otherwise be criminalized. We see barriers to education broadly, and we see that in the dismantling of our education system right before our very eyes. And we also see the sort of political and media spillover in our communities and in our schools. And I think about the students that we hear from across the country and who our colleagues at AFT are sharing with their work on the ground in these schools. Students are fearful, even if they are here with legal status, about what that means for their families, what that means when they're perceived as other or immigrant, the sort of bullying, harassment, and discrimination they face. And so the reality is we can't ignore it. I think
No.
the chaos that overwhelms us, both in the media and having to navigate, it's purposeful, right? They want the chaos to make us feel helpless. And in these moments, we can't feel helpless. And that's why, whether you're using digital ways of organizing or more analog ways of organizing, there is something for each and every one of us to do. I love analog ways of organizing. It's how I came into this beautiful leaderful and followshipful movement space. We can have kitchen table meetings. We can create, bilingual book exchanges to celebrate all of our cultures and to celebrate the major contributions of immigrant students and families. We can be actively protesting. We just saw this past weekend an incredible showing of people in the No Kings rally, because we live in a beautiful multiracial democracy and there are no kings here. There are no
That's
kings
right.
here. Feudalism
That's
didn't
right.
work for anybody, you know? And
Yes.
so I think the reality is, regardless of what you do, do something, connect with local communities, connect with national organizations like MomsRising and your local communities that are taking action every day. When you see these opportunities to mobilize, take them, push your legislators, even if they feel powerless, to be outwardly outspoken against these bad bills. That's what it really should be called. Bad betrayal bill. Exactly what you said, because it is exactly that. It is robbing the American people. It is robbing our communities of the very safety net that we have spent generations investing in and building, and trying to shift that in service to oligarchs, to the obscenely wealthy, and to people who have aspirations to be kings. And again, we live in a beautiful multiracial democracy that we work tirelessly every day to ensure actualizes its democratic vision and dream. And anybody who seeks to, deny our communities, that is, to me, an enemy. And we have to make sure that we take action every day to resist that, even in the moments, particularly in the moments where we feel powerless.
I love what you're saying. And join a group like MomsRising so you're not alone as you're listening to
Absolutely.
this. I mean, you're definitely not alone, listeners. You can just look at the news from, the No Kings marches and see that you're not alone. I want to share a little bit with our listeners about something that a lot of people don't know. In that big bad betrayal budget bill, there is extreme cuts to things like Medicaid, and the Republicans like Donald Trump and the Republican leaders are trying to pay for those extreme cuts by giving tax breaks to the very wealthy, right? But what people don't know is there is over $150 billion in there for extreme, cruel immigration efforts and measures. And so our Medicaid is being proposed to be cut to fund even more cruel immigration measures. That's important. So I'm going to say it again. Trump and Republicans in Congress are planning extreme cuts to Medicaid to pay for separating families, to pay for human rights abuses, to pay for terrifying, hardworking immigrants, people who are essential to our care workforce, to our economy, to our futures, to our school communities. And that is not okay. Our nation absolutely needs a safe and orderly immigration process that balances compassion and security. We also need Medicaid and healthcare for all. We do not need cuts to healthcare. We do not need cuts to, we do not need cruelty. And so when you're calling your senators, tell them vote no on that big bad betrayal bill, because we want to say no to cuts to healthcare and no to cruelty. And Beatriz, what keeps you going when it's so doomful?
Honestly, it's seeing the generosity, the care, the mutual aid that people are engaging in to respond to this climate that is incredibly hostile. What I'm seeing is that so many of our institutions are being attacked and dismantled. And the reality is, when these institutions start to fail because they are being stripped away with the critical resources and tools and people, right? That help to kind of keep them going and ensure that the American people have what they need, that our community opens its arms up, our community takes action, parents and caregivers take action, advocates take action, because we all know that we are stronger together. You talked about the policy. One of my colleagues I overheard recently saying that what we're seeing across the country with the dismantling of these institutions, the toxic, vitriolic rhetoric that we're seeing pushed on so many communities, is not policy. This
Yep,
big bad bill is not policy, it's cruelty.
yep,
And I
that's right.
think we have to continue to push that. We have to continue to center that narrative that this is not policy, this is not democracy, this is othering, this is cruelty, and we cannot allow it to continue here. We have to continue to fight, we have to continue to mobilize, and we have to continue to do it together, because that's what they fear most, all of us coming together. And
And
I
we all
believe
are
there's more of
together.
us than them.
Yes, I'm like, we all are together. I was
We are together.
so happy. I mean, I like looked at the pictures of the marches, and then I like waited an hour. Then I looked
Powerful.
again at the pictures of the marches, and I waited an hour. I'm going to look at those pictures of those marches until the
It's
very
so
next set of
inspiring.
marches. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so inspiring and it's so powerful. And it's me, it's you, it's all of us together. It's our neighbors, our children, our families, our loved ones mobilizing in the streets and each and every day ensuring that we are infusing acts of generosity and kindness against this cruelty. That's how we win.
That is how we win. Thank you so much for being on, Beatriz Beckford. Woo, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take a quick break, but stick around. We'll be right back with our next guest talking about something that's hardly ever talked about. The voucher proposal that is hidden in the budget bill disaster moving through Congress right now. We'll be back in a quick flash. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by MomsRising. We are joined right now by a very special expert guest. We have Liz King with the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited that you're here, and I'm excited that you're here for a very bad reason. And the bad reason is that we need to bust the myths and stop confusion about vouchers. Republicans right now and Donald Trump are trying to take over our education system and make a ton of money off of it and make us pay for it. And they're doing that through a voucher situation. And I call it a situation because it can often look okay at first, but actually it's not okay. So can you give our listeners a little bit of an update on what is happening with vouchers, where is this coming from, and why it's wrong for families?
Yeah, so we've been using the word scheme, right? Or you could go with boondoggle, you could go with nonsense, you could go with foolishness. So what they're trying to do here is spend money on vouchers through the tax code using this process called reconciliation. And it is this convoluted congressional thing. But the reason they have to jump through all these hoops and do all these machinations is because private school voucher programs are wildly unpopular. So if any of this were remotely democratic, even, small d democratic in terms of the people choosing, but even if Republicans themselves were voting on this as a standalone measure, it doesn't have the votes. They've tried and they've tried, it doesn't have the votes. So they have to do all this scheming and all of this maneuvering in order to get done what they're trying to get done. And there's a twofold thing going on here, which makes this even more dastardly. On the one hand, they're trying to provide a huge tax benefit to rich tax filers. They are trying to lower the tax burden for wealthy people. And then they're trying to use that money to undermine public education and prop up private schools. Now, a lot of what we're talking about here is not children who currently attend public schools, leaving their public schools and going to private schools. A lot of what we're talking about here is taxpayers, is the American public just subsidizing the private tuition that is already being paid by these families who are sending their child to private schools. So it's a mess all around. From the perspective of the civil and human rights community, it is particularly a mess because it is feeding money into a system that does not provide children adequate protections from non-discrimination. That means if your child has a disability and they have an IEP or they have a 504 plan and you've done what you need to do working with your school to make sure your child's rights are being respected, that they are included in their classroom alongside their non-disabled peers, that they have access to the supports they're entitled to really benefit from their free appropriate public education, you get all of that. You've done the work as a parent to get your child set up for success as best you can in the public school. If you were to take them out and send them to a private school, all of that disappears. So not only could they exclude your child entirely from enrollment because they have a disability, even if they were to let them in, they could then deny them the services, the processes, the rights that you're entitled to. Now, the same thing is true. Let's say you're a kid with two moms. Let's say you're a kid who has only one parent. Let's say you're a kid who doesn't practice the religion that is practiced by the private school in your area. They can shut you out, they can exclude you, and they can make your life more difficult. So we're looking at this double whammy that is diverting funds that we need for public education to make sure every school is fully funded to meet the needs of every child, while at the same time opening the door to federally funding discriminatory education that doesn't include all children. So it's a mess across the board. But here's the good news, is that this is being debated right now and no deal is done till it's done. So every single one of your listeners can pick up the phone and call their senator and call their representative and say, stop the nonsense, stop the scheme. This is terrible. Nobody wants this mess. And they need to shut it down. Take it out of reconciliation. We should not be diverting public funds to private schools. We should not be allowing for discrimination. And we should not be undermining public education, which is a bedrock cornerstone of our democracy. So you're totally right, Kristen. This is a hot mess, but thankfully there's something we can all do about it today.
So everybody call your U.S. senators, vote no on the big bad betrayal budget that's coming up for a vote very soon. I want to dive into what you call the boondoggle. I agree with the boondoggle. It is terrible. That's a great way to name it. So what we didn't say out loud, and I want to say out loud in a pointed way, is as we're diverting public funds to private schools, those private schools are often for profit. There is often someone who is profiting, or a corporation who is profiting off of what should be public education, which is a public trust, which is where our taxpayers go to lift all of us. Can you talk a little bit about what happens when we shift public money to private, gains?
Yeah, so that's another great point here, right? So if this does move forward, if it does become law, we are going to see a proliferation, an expansion of the number of for-profit private schools that are going to sell families on an impossible dream, take their money, take their kid, and leave them with a lousy education. I think the way that this scheme is set up, it is inviting bad actors. It is inviting people who want to get into the enterprise, who want to benefit from the windfall, who have no knowledge of or commitment to the education of our children. And that absolutely right here. So I think there is an idea here, oh, well, we're thinking about the local community Catholic school that's been there serving the community for decades, or, oh, we're thinking about the church basement school, or, oh, we're thinking about this well-established private school, non-sectarian, been there for a long time. Yes, that is part of the package here, and we should talk about that. But let's also talk about all of these shady storefront actors that are going to show up because there's an opportunity to get paid. And I think you're absolutely right to raise the alarm here. The way that this is set up, it is inviting shady actors. It is inviting people to come and profit from our system without serving our children.
And when we have a potential for-profit gain, we also have an incentive for cutting corners and educating children. So when we just heard Liz talk about all the programs that are mandated, importantly, by taxpayer decision, by voter decision in public schools, as those mandates fall off, we also have an incentive come on for cutting programs, cutting corners, cutting everything so that kids just get the very core basics of their education so that whoever is profiting from that school can take home the most to their personal bank account. It's ridiculous. So Liz, I want to just talk with you a little bit about another terrible, very bad, awful thing that can happen when we have situations where we have sort of a privatization of the public school system and this voucher. We have heard reports from some southern states who have kind of tested out this voucher situation that it ends up being less school choice instead of more school choice. That the vouchers actually act as a vacuum cleaner, vacuuming funds out of the public schools. So then public schools have to close down into these private profit situations. And that really causes a lot of parent problems because they have less choices. The local public elementary school closes, or the local middle school, or whatever is closing. And then you only have the option of this potentially unprotected, cutting corners private situation. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the most important ways to think about this is what is happening for rural communities, right? In a lot of rural communities, the public education, this public school district, the public school may be the largest employer in the county. And in a lot of these rural communities, those public schools are the only schools available to them. And so if you start sucking funding away from those public schools, there just will not be schools for those children. They're going to have to go to some low quality provider online. And so there's a lot of scenarios here where this is not about making sure that we have the right fit school for every child. This is not about fixing the very real weaknesses in some of our public schools that are not effectively serving all of our children. This is not about solving problems. This is about creating new problems. And I think that's what we all need to be eyes wide open here about what's really going on. And to your point, what the real motivation here. The goal of this is not to improve educational opportunity for students facing barriers to success. That's not at all what they're trying to do. They're trying to do two things. They're trying to help the rich and the powerful get richer and more powerful, and they're trying to dismantle, disrupt, and destroy our public school system. And that's what their goal is, and that's what they're hoping nobody will notice because it's complicated, and it's weird, and it's a scheme, and it's reconciliation, and they have to go through the bird rule, and all of these process things, when what they're doing here is quite plain. It's not new. It's not a new script. It's not a new idea. It's just a new way of trying it because all of the other ways they've tried before haven't worked. People have shown up. They've called their senator, they've called their representative and said, nobody wants this, stop it. And because the people spoke out before, they're trying it this new way. And it just doesn't make any sense at all.
And just to dive in on something that you said, this is part of a greater overarching campaign against, wait for it, public schools. We've seen the Trump campaign and Republicans in Congress really go after the Department of Education, defund, fire everybody, all the things. Like, they're going after education. We don't have that much time left, but can you share why? I mean, I look around, we get a lot of questions from our members and listeners like, why are Republicans and Donald Trump attacking public education? That is part of what makes America really great.
Yeah, I mean, what every child knows, what every parent knows is that education is freedom. That the right to read, the right to do math, the opportunity to learn facts, to be able to process what's going on around you, the opportunity to think critically is a huge threat to fascism. It's a threat to authoritarianism. They are trying to create barriers to educational opportunity because they know that is how you destroy a democracy. The way you destroy a democracy is you start with the schools. You deny an education to the children, and that's where it begins. And that's why they're trying to destroy the Department of Education, and that's why they're trying to dismantle our civil rights laws. And that's why they're trying to just to take all of these things away from us, because they know that knowledge is power. They know that education is freedom, and they know what it means for children and families when they have the chance to learn about themselves and the world around them. They know how dangerous a well-educated child is. And so we need to do everything we can to ensure that every single child gets the education they're entitled to, because we know that's what makes our country great. That's what makes our society great. That's what makes our neighborhoods great. That's why families are so invested in pursuing a high quality public education for their child. They know the power. We know the power. We have to use our power now.
And I love what you said at the beginning, which I just want to uplift again, which is Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Green Party, you name it. People of every party support access to education. And so what Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump are doing is actually the opposite of what their constituents want. And it's really a handout to people who are potentially large political donors like billionaires. It's not representing their constituents. So we have only about a minute and a half left. We've talked about a lot of big problems. We've talked about the need to fight for our right for every child to be educated. And what can people do just in sum? We talked about calling members of Congress, but let's talk about it again.
Yeah, absolutely. So this big, terrible bill that you mentioned, it has this voucher scheme, and it's got a lot more terrible in it, right? I would be remiss if I didn't call out the horrible cuts to Medicaid and what that is going to mean for schools and education, because a lot of children who receive services through Medicaid receive them at school because those services help them to benefit from their education. And so cuts to Medicaid are cuts to education. Not only are they direct cuts to education because the way schools use Medicaid funding to ensure children have the supports they need, but if Medicaid is cut, then state budgets will cut education. They will come for higher education and K-12 education. We need to shut down this bill. We need to reject this bill. We need to throw this bill into the dustbin of history. It has no value. Brings pain and pain and pain for communities in every corner of this country. And so the big thing is call your member of Congress. If you haven't done it yet today, it's a great time to start. Call them back tomorrow in celebration of Juneteenth, and then call them again on Friday. Call them every single day. No matter what their party is, everyone has a responsibility to show up for every child and every family, no matter what, every day.
I totally agree. So you have 2 U.S. senators Both of them need a call, and they need a call to say vote no on the big bad betrayal bill. It's a betrayal of the American public. It's a betrayal of our economy. These types of policies actually do not boost our economy overall. It's a betrayal of our communities. So please give a call and say vote no. Thank you so much, Liz King of the Leadership Conference. Woo, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break. But next up, we're looking at what the negative impact has been in Florida when vouchers were implemented and how we can use those lessons nationally to fight back a national voucher system. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Ralph Finkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We have a strong public schools perspective in this show this week. And to join us in that, we have Damaris Allen of Families for Strong Public Schools. Welcome, Damaris.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're on because a lot of people don't realize the many ways and angles that public schools are under attack, nor do they realize what people can do to fight back. So as we're having this conversation about the need for strong public schools, can you share a little bit about your organization and what you're doing right now to fight back and protect our education in America?
Sure. So my organization is based in Florida. And as many of you know, Florida is the home of often very bad education policy. It is often tested in Florida and farmed out to other states. And one of the things we're deeply concerned about is the expansion of vouchers. Currently, there's a federal tax credit voucher program that is being snuck through in the reconciliation process. And that is what we want to make sure the rest of the country doesn't have to be stuck with, because we are seeing it devastate our schools in Florida and devastate opportunities for public school students in Florida.
We've heard a lot of reports from our members in Florida about that devastation, and it's actually hard to describe, but the devastation includes public schools closing. Can you share a little bit about the many ways in Florida and locally when these policies are tested out that the devastation happens?
Sure. So like you said, we're seeing lots of school closures and discussions of school closures. So communities are losing a vital community asset, their community school. So a lot of times we'll have people that have to drive farther or be on a bus longer to get to their schools because their local schools are closing. We had a smaller district in Florida close down 3 schools just because 42 students left the public schools. They closed down 3 separate schools. So they're using it as an excuse for closing down schools. Just this last session, we saw the legislature consider not fully funding courses for students like advanced placement or international baccalaureate programs, and even career and technical education programs in order to continue funding vouchers. Our voucher program next year is set to cost about $5.1 billion
In Florida.
In Florida alone.
In Florida,
And
people.
yeah, and we're not getting anything for that investment. Most of the schools receiving vouchers are not accredited. The Department of Education website tells parents to check with their child's future employer and future college to ensure their transcripts are going to be accepted, which every parent knows you have no idea what your kid wants to be. And sometimes even into college, you're not sure what your child wants to be.
Nor where they're going to work. I mean, you just don't know. And the thing is that our elementary schools, our middle schools, our high schools, our public elementary, middle school, and high schools are in public trust. They are public community centers. They're more than just schools. They're places that people go to have Girl Scout meetings or Boy Scout meetings or, all kinds of things. People use the libraries, the fields, they're very much a community place. And there is no reason or no mandate for any of those voucher schools to open their doors to the public. So what does that mean in communities when you lose the public schools?
Well, for a lot of communities, that means for high schools, they lose Friday night football games in smaller communities. For schools in the South, especially those who are impacted by hurricanes, we lose our hurricane shelters. So that literally puts all of our residents in danger. And so you just lose this vital community asset that brings people together, like you said, for meetings, for voting locations, for
Oh,
all of
voting.
those
That's
things.
important.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't even think of that. Oh my goodness. This is bad. So this is already happening in the States, in Florida. We already have the evidence that when we put in voucher programs, it costs billions with a B of dollars in just one state alone. And it is like a vacuum cleaner sucking the actual engine of being opened out of public schools and into private sector. Are there people making a whole bunch of money off of these voucher funded public schools?
Absolutely. We see a lot of pop-up private schools that will just come out of nowhere, and will often close down at a moment's notice. We had a school just in one of our counties over the winter holiday that sent an email to parents and said, we're no longer going to be we're not going to reopen in January when the holiday is over. And I can't even imagine being a parent having to tell your child, and remember, these are kids who went through this with COVID, who didn't get to go back to their school, and now we're doing that to them again. And these schools don't even have services. I think the other thing that's really important to remember is that, especially families of students with disabilities, you waive your federal protections when you take a voucher. So there's no guarantee of services for your student. And I know a parent who was had her child in a private school for 2 years and didn't receive services for her child at all, and didn't realize that was happening. And that's devastating, for the parents and for the students.
It's also something that public schools that can do, which is like pool their resources. So it's not uncommon to have an art teacher, for example, who might visit several elementary, middle school, or high schools and not be funded solely by one school, so that the schools can share the costs of that art curriculum. Similarly, we've seen a similar thing with gym teachers. They might be shared through multiple schools, or they might coach kids from multiple schools, particularly in more rural school districts or other places, right? Like this whole idea of shared costs. Language teachers, again, also sometimes are shared by multiple schools. And as you mentioned, advanced curriculum. That is often shared, that cost, by multiple schools with like a roving teacher. But when you get into one very tiny voucher school, they usually have two things going on. One, they can't afford those types of teachers because they're not sharing those types of teachers with other schools. Two, they have an incentive to spend less money on education because they're trying to vacuum out that money for their personal pockets. And so, do you see that happening too in Florida?
Absolutely. And what's happening is then our public schools are losing those great programs you're talking about, right? So our public schools, because they are siphoning those funds away so that the rich can get richer, we are seeing our public schools lose great programs like band programs and art programs and all of these things that contribute to so much more than just learning an art or learning how to play music. My son, for example, wants to get his PhD in physics, and he will tell you that is because of his music teachers, that he has that drive because he was in band his entire public school career. And so I think we need to recognize that these things that are often seen as extras are vital for our students, to learn how to work cooperatively, to learn discipline, to learn all of these skills that are necessary for success.
So we have these case studies in states like yours, Florida, that show that the idea, the dream, the vision of the voucher education system actually doesn't work at all. It doesn't help students. It's not helping education. It's just not helping. In fact, it is a weird use of tax dollars to make some people richer without advancing education. So even though we have these examples, Congress is still moving forward. It is so annoying. I mean, it's sort of like you'd almost not really give people an excuse, but almost give people an excuse if they had no idea that the unintended consequence of a voucher program was to undermine, destabilize, and shut down local public schools, but they have an idea. So what do you think it's going to take to make sure every member of Congress knows that in practice, at the state level, like Florida, vouchers do the opposite of what many leaders in Congress from the Republican Party are saying that they would do?
I think we have to use our voices. We have to recognize that we have an opportunity right now. It specifically, I would say, call our senators from your state and let them know that you do not want a voucher program. You do not want to lose this vital funding for our public schools. And remind them that in most states where this has gone to a vote, every state, in fact, where this has gone to a vote, people have voted vouchers down. People do not want vouchers. We saw it in 3 states during the last election that it was widely rejected in Colorado, in Kentucky, and in Nebraska, all voted against vouchers. So when people have the option to decide, they say clearly they do not want it. They want their public schools to be fully funded, and they want opportunity for all students, not just some students.
It's so important. So how can people get involved and support your organization?
So right now, if you follow us on any social media, Strong FL Schools, all of our social media is Strong FL Schools. You can see we have been posting a ton about the vouchers and how they are harmful and they can get engaged. Right now, we're doing a fax your senators because often that will break through the noise. So we have a toolkit ready for you that you can find if you go to our social media about how to fax your senators and let them know that you do not want this voucher program. And then we also have another toolkit where you can send them a postcard at home. And then there's also, I would also say, call them as well. And that's really easy to look up. Just look up your US Senator. There's only 2 phone numbers and give them a call and let them know you're a constituent and you don't want your tax dollars being wasted in this way.
The other thing you can do, you all, is you can go to Strong FL Schools, even if you don't live in Florida, and can look at the examples of doom of how the voucher system has been implemented in Florida and what it's done to undermine actual real life public schools that lift everybody. And you can share those examples of doom with your US senators. So you can say, hey, US Senator, this might have been a good idea that somebody had maybe while taking a walk one day. Turns out not a good idea when it's implemented. And we have the example of why it's not a good idea from Florida, where it's shutting down public schools. And then you can source Strong FL Schools with them as an example, because sometimes people don't believe people these days. So using Strong FL Schools as a source, as an example of why vouchers don't work, could be really powerful. As we're closing, I just want to ask you a little bit, in this moment of hard time when we're doom scrolling, hopefully not all day, but the headlines are super bad, what's giving you hope?
Students, they are standing up, they're using their voices, and they are fighting for their fellow students and for future students, and they're motivating parents and others to do so. And they have always been a source for hope for me. One time, it was back when my son was in elementary school. I said to him, I just wish that I could have given you a better world to grow up in. And he said to me, don't, because you have taught me to make it a better place. And I think that is what gives me hope, is that I see these students every single day fighting for their friends. And I hope that they continue to do so, because our voices do matter and we have to not give up and we have to not stop using them.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like the whole part of what we're doing is like a give a clue project, because unfortunately, many members of Congress, particularly in the Republican Party, are so out of touch with what's actually happening with real live families that when we share our story, when we reach out, we are often surprised that the members of Congress in the Republican Party, sometimes they actually listen and they go, oh, so share your story also with your member of Congress, with your senators, when you do call to say a no vouchers in the big bad betrayal bill, and actually no big bad betrayal budget bill at all. Please vote no on the whole thing. And don't give up. You know, the future generation is rising. We are all together creating a tsunami of change, and we do see that change is actually moving. Just the very fact that so many people turned out for the No Kings rally recently is really, really, really uplifting. So thank you so much for being on. Thank you for all you do. Everybody get involved and stay involved. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. Next up, we're celebrating Pride Month, and we have tips for the fair treatment of all families in every community. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao-Finkbeiner, powered by MomsRising. It is Pride Month, and we are celebrating here. We're celebrating right now with Shannon Minter with the National Center for LGBTQ Rights. Welcome, Shannon.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride. I'm like, this is a month to celebrate, but we're celebrating during a devastating time. So I want to both celebrate and I want to activate. Can you share a little bit about how the LGBTQ community is under attack from the far right, which includes Donald Trump, who happens to hold the Oval Office right now, and the Republican leaders in Congress? What's happening?
Yeah, well, we're in a moment of, we would just have to say pretty devastating backlash. I just want to remind everyone, though, that the reason we're having a backlash is because we made so much progress so quickly. I'm a transgender man. I've, been working in this area for, 30 some years. So let's not forget, not that long ago, we did not have marriage equality. Most transgender people did not have their health care covered by insurance or by Medicaid or Medicare programs. We did not have employment protections. So we have all of that now. We have all of that. And that is like a huge turnaround, but it is under attack. And especially with transgender people, my goodness, we've got half the country now, half the states have banned transgender young people from school sports. So cruel, so unnecessary. And even more devastating are the healthcare bans. And we are talking, Kristen, this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court did uphold Tennessee's ban on medical care for transgender young people. And that is a devastating blow. And my heart goes out to all the families that I know are just having to struggle today with what this means for them. But we are not going to give up on that issue or any other issue. And it's not game over. There are still ways we can legally challenge those bans, and we also can go back to those state legislatures and urge them to don't pass a categorical ban. If there's concerns about the healthcare, the way it's being administered, there's a middle ground. We can ask them, it's fine. Pass a law saying that providers have to follow careful guidelines. You can impose, waiting periods before a young person can get medications. There's middle ground here, and we can get that back.
I love that you started this conversation with the gains, the wins that we can all celebrate together. I mean, that was just so good to hear. It had my heart like feeling happy. And then we went to the devastating parts. And I think that's important to talk about a little bit more too. Right now, there are so many myths, so many misinformation points, so many disinformation points going around. What are the most common misinformation and disinformation points that we should bust right now while we have a big audience listening?
Yeah, well, there's so many misconceptions about the healthcare for transgender young people. I mean, I will tell you, I have never seen the mainstream press do such a miserable job of covering an issue. It has been literally just devastating to watch very respected outlets print stuff that is just so far off the mark. And one thing that's happening is I think there's even some people in the LGBT community who are starting to be like, well, hey, maybe there is some problem with this healthcare since that's all I ever read. So I really want people to know that is just not true. It's true that there are many, many more young people now who are identifying in some way outside of the gender norm as gender queer or non-binary or what have you, but there has not been a huge increase in the number of young people who have severe gender dysphoria and who are that is the small group of young people who may need medical interventions. So that's one giant misconception. And then there's this misconception that these providers are just handing out these medications willy-nilly, that all a young person has to do is just show up and say, I would like to get on medical treatment, and that happens. And that is just completely untrue. I mean, these providers, and I have, because I've been litigating in this area, have gotten to know these clinics across the country really well. They are so careful. I mean, they put these young people through the most careful evaluation, diagnosis, assessment. They talk to parents. The parents have to consent. The young person has to have a very clear, persistent identity over time. That young person has to be really suffering. So the care is being done in a highly responsible way. And then you will read that it's not supported by scientific research. That is really baloney. There's a new report, a systematic review of all of the medical literature on this issue that was done by, of all places, the Utah legislature commissioned the University of Utah to do a thorough, comprehensive review. And I will tell you, the Utah legislature was skeptical of this care. I'm sure they thought this review was going to come out saying, you know, we're not really sure this is supported. It was just the opposite. It found that there is substantial research supporting the safety and effectiveness of this care. So I think those are some of the main misconceptions that people have.
And you mentioned something about the news regularly covering this in the wrong way. So
Yep.
if people are listening right now, if people are watching right now and they're like, oh my gosh, I did not realize that this is being covered so wrongly. What are the places that people can go to get more accurate information? Now, everybody, I know you want to read the University of Utah report, but in
Yes.
addition to that, what did the report say? We'll come back to that. But in addition to that, what else should people be reading or watching or following just to really get like the real information in a long-term way?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Well, I'll tell you, that report is 1,000 pages, so people probably won't be just, it's not really a page turner, but the conclusions are very, very clear. But the best places to go are like the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have really clear information on their websites, and you can reach out to them and find out what's what. But yeah, but that Utah report, it just, I can tell you the highlights. I mean, the report said, you know what? We had seen these criticisms that this care is not supported by very much research. And they're like, we found just the opposite. They looked at more than 277 studies supporting that this care is safe and it works and it really helps these young people. And that's pretty much it. There's a lot of research. It shows safety and it shows efficacy. And one of the big things they found is that young people who, again, go through this careful screening and diagnosis have dramatically reduced suicidality when they get this care. I mean, it really is life-saving for the small number of kids who need it.
And that's one thing that I was going to ask about. We've seen studies and data about the increased depression and anxiety in America that is also compounded in communities that are under intense discrimination and pressure. And so what's happening right now in that area for the LGBTQ community as a whole?
Yeah, I think this is a tough time for LGBT young people, but they're also tough. And, you know, that's something we need to be careful about, that we're not accidentally, you know, sending messages to these young people that you should feel victimized or you should feel fragile or vulnerable. We're tough. We're a tough community. They're tough kids. We can support each other. There's a lot of public support for us out there. I will tell you what, I just got back from a conference in Salt Lake City, Utah, at Brigham Young University Law School. Very conservative state, very conservative law school. And the conference was a bunch of very conservative legal scholars. But they invited me to come. I was blown away by how much support there is in that setting for LGBT people. We make a mistake when we assume that people sort of on the center right or in the more conservative part of the political spectrum, or especially conservative religious people, we make a big mistake when we demonize them or assume that don't support us. They want to hear from us. They want to talk with us. They want to work with us to find reasonable solutions to all these issues that are ripping our country apart about sports, healthcare, curriculum, school issues. We're leaving a lot of opportunities lying on the table. And I can't encourage people enough listening to just don't be afraid and don't assume the worst. Try assuming the best and reach out to people. And I guarantee you will be pleasantly surprised.
And then in honor of Pride Month, as we celebrate the diversity of America, what can people do in terms of action? Like, do you have some action steps for people?
Yeah, we really need every single person to reach out to your state and federal representatives. Tell them that you support equality for LGBT people and that you definitely oppose any attempt at the state or federal level to ban or restrict healthcare for transgender people. That's such a huge issue right now, and it is kind of life and death for people. So that one deserves some prioritizing. But then I would also encourage people to try having conversations with people that you think may not, be fully supportive. And one thing that I have learned actually very much in the past year, working with experts on how to counter disinformation, it's just been fascinating to learn about this. But it turns out the worst thing you can do if somebody is promulgating misinformation or just really laboring under really false ideas about something, directly confronting people doesn't work. Reaching out and saying, hey, you know what? You're wrong and let me educate you. It does not work. But what does work is really listening, trying to find some point of commonality and mutual shared values about something, and then just very gently, just super gently bringing people along, being like, I hear you. I can understand why you have these questions or concerns. That makes sense. Let me just tell you, I have a family member who I saw this young person go from really suffering. And then when they got the care they needed, boy, you should see them now. They're happy and outgoing. It just kind of gave me something to think about. Just being gentle, indirect, respectful, and stressing some point of commonality is super effective. And you know what? It's a lot easier. It's easier too. It's not fun confronting people. And we don't need to. We don't have to. It doesn't even work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done it too, both ways.
Yeah.
Personal experience from saying you're wrong does not work as well as, can you tell me a little bit more about why you think that? And I'll share why I do. That's better. Yeah. So you're so right. How can people support the National Center for LGBTQ Rights?
Well, we always need financial support. I tell you what, we are all out right now. We're a legal organization. We're bringing so many lawsuits challenging some of the terrible new policies that are coming at us from this administration. And we're making good progress. Our philosophy about this is let's try to stop these harmful policies where we can, delay them where we can, and just do plain old harm reduction where we can. And we're actually doing pretty well on those fronts. So, and then just signing up to get our newsletters and our emails so you can, keep yourself informed about what's happening in the legal world. And then if you're seeing something going on where you live, it's really helpful to us to hear about that. I love when people just reach out and tell us, hey, this is what's happening in my neighborhood or my state. It helps us really kind of understand what's going on the ground.
In honor of Pride Month and every day of the year, we hope you join, support, and follow the National Center for LGBTQ Rights. Thank you so much for being on, Shannon. Thanks for all you're doing.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This was great.
Thank you. Well, that's it for our show today. Thanks so much for tuning in as we tackle the top topics facing our nation in a way that requires the most boring disclaimer in the history of the planet Earth. Here goes. Views expressed on this show are those of the individual speakers and should not be attributed to MomsRising, to this station, or to any news or social media service that may disseminate a recording of this show to the public or to any segment of the public. Boom! We'll catch you next week.